What if the moment you called your biggest failure was actually life protecting you from something you weren't ready to understand yet? Daniel thought his dream ended with a rejection letter from an elite art school. He believed that was the end of his story. But what happened next will change the way you see failure, patience, and timing forever. Because sometimes, life doesn't reject you, it redirects you. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why everything that breaks you might actually be building you. The rain fell steadily over Seattle. Inside a quiet corner cafe, Daniel Brooks stood by the window, his fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He wasn't really looking at the rain. He was looking through it, lost in a memory that refused to let him go. 2 years earlier, everything had felt different. Back then, Daniel had a plan, a clear and burning vision of his future. He would move to New York City, attend one of the most prestigious art schools in the country, and finally prove to himself and to the world that his talent meant something. Every sketch, every sleepless night, every sacrifice had led to that one application. He remembered the day the letter arrived. The envelope had felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried more than just paper inside. His hands trembled slightly as he tore it open, his heart racing with a mix of hope and fear. For a brief second, he allowed himself to imagine the words he wanted to see. But they weren't there. The rejection was polite, almost gentle in its wording, but its impact was anything but. It was final and cold. Back in the cafe, Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the glass. The sound of laughter from another table felt distant, like it belonged to a world he was no longer part of. Outside, people hurried through the rain, chasing their own destinations, their own purposes. Daniel, however, felt stuck, like time had moved on without him. As another drop slid down the window, he whispered to himself, almost bitterly, "What happens when your only plan falls apart?" The days that followed the rejection didn't collapse all at once, they faded slowly, like a light dimming in a room no one noticed was growing dark. Daniel stopped waking up with purpose. Mornings turned into long, silent stretches of nothing. His alarm would ring, but he'd silence it without a second thought, staring at the ceiling as if answers might appear there. They never did. His sketchbooks, once scattered across his room in chaotic bursts of creativity, now sat untouched on a dusty shelf. At first, he told himself he just needed a break. A few days to breathe. A moment to reset. But days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. And the break became something else entirely. Every time he thought about picking up a pencil, a quiet voice crept in. "What's the point?" It would whisper. "You weren't good enough then. What makes you think anything has changed?" So he stopped trying. Friends reached out at first, texts, calls, invitations, but Daniel ignored them. It was easier to disappear than to explain the heaviness he carried. Even simple conversations felt exhausting, like pretending to be someone he no longer recognized. The world moved on without him, and he let it. One morning started with a knock on his door. Daniel didn't answer at first. He rarely did these days. But the knocking didn't stop, steady, persistent, almost determined to break through the silence he had built around himself. "Daniel, I know you're in there," Emma's voice called out. "And no, you're not ignoring me today." He sighed, dragging himself off the bed and opening the door just enough to see her standing there, hands on her hips, eyes filled with concern, and something stronger. Refusal. "Get dressed," she said simply. "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel muttered, already stepping back. "Yes, you are," she replied, pushing the door wider. "There's a street fair downtown. And you're coming with me." "I'm not in the mood for crowds, Emma." "You're not in the mood for anything," she shot back. "That's the problem. You don't have to enjoy it. Just, come." Reluctantly, Daniel gave in. The fair was alive with energy. Music drifting through the air, laughter spilling from every corner, colors blending in a vibrant display of life he had forgotten existed. At first, he stayed close to Emma, detached, uninterested. But as they walked past rows of handmade crafts and paintings, something began to shift. He noticed the artists. They weren't polished or perfect. Some worked with rough strokes, others with bold, unconventional styles. Yet every piece carried something undeniable: emotion, honesty, life. These weren't people waiting for approval. They were simply creating. Daniel slowed his steps, his eyes lingering on a canvas filled with chaotic colors that somehow made perfect sense. For the first time in months, he felt something stir within him. Not confidence. Not yet. But curiosity. And it was enough to make him pause. The feeling didn't disappear when Daniel left the fair, it followed him home, quiet but persistent, like a thought waiting to be acknowledged. That night, he sat at his desk, staring at his old sketchbook. His fingers hovered over it, hesitant, as if touching it might reopen something he wasn't ready to face. For a long moment, he did nothing. Then, slowly, he opened it. The pages were filled with pieces of who he used to be, dreams captured in lines and shades, moments of inspiration frozen in time. It hurt to look at them, but it also reminded him of something he had nearly forgotten. He loved this. Not the validation. Not the approval. Just this. The next morning, without overthinking it, Daniel made a decision that surprised even him. He signed up for a booth at the next street fair. The day arrived faster than expected. Standing behind his small display, Daniel felt exposed, like every brushstroke was being judged before anyone even stopped to look. People passed by without slowing down, their attention caught by brighter, louder displays. Minutes stretched into hours. Doubt crept in again. This was a mistake, he thought. You're not ready. You never were. He considered packing up early. But something held him there. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the memory of how it felt to create again. Whatever it was, he stayed. As the sun began to set and the crowd thinned, Daniel leaned against his table, exhausted and disappointed. The day had been quiet, too quiet. He exhaled deeply, preparing himself to leave. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me, are these yours?" Daniel turned, his heart skipping slightly. And for the first time that day, someone had stopped. Daniel turned slowly. An older woman stood there, dressed simply, her eyes calm but observant. She wasn't rushing like the others who had passed by all day. Instead, she studied his paintings with a kind of patience that made Daniel uneasy, in a way he couldn't explain. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "They're mine." She nodded once and stepped closer to the display. Her gaze moved from one piece to another, lingering longer than anyone else had bothered to. Daniel watched her carefully, searching for any hint of judgment, rejection, or pity. But her expression remained unreadable. Minutes passed. The silence between them wasn't empty, it felt heavy, meaningful, almost like something important was being decided without words. Finally, she spoke. "You don't paint what people expect," she said softly. Daniel blinked, unsure how to respond. She continued, her voice steady but gentle. You paint what they feel. Those words landed deeper than anything he had heard in years. Daniel looked at her, trying to understand why a stranger's sentence felt like it was pulling something buried inside him back to the surface. No one had ever described his work like that. Not his teachers. Not his peers. Not even himself. The woman offered a faint smile, then placed a small purchase on the table without fanfare, as if it was never about the money. It takes courage, she added, to create something honest when no one is asking you to. And then she walked away. Daniel stood still, watching her disappear into the crowd. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear this time, but from something unfamiliar. Recognition. Not of success, but of himself. For the first time since the rejection, the silence inside him didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like possibility. After that day, Daniel kept showing up. At the next street fair, and the one after that, Daniel returned with the same small booth, the same paintings, and the same uncertainty in his chest. But now, he also carried something else, resilience shaped by repetition. At first, nothing changed. People still walked past without noticing. Some days felt just as empty as before. There were moments he questioned whether Mrs. Alvarez's words had been real or just kindness dressed as encouragement. But he didn't stop. Slowly, the pattern began to break. A few people stopped. Then a few more. They asked questions. They lingered longer. One day, a local art blogger featured one of his pieces online. Then a small gallery owner from Portland, Oregon, visited the fair after hearing about the artist who paints emotion instead of perfection. That visit changed everything. The gallery owner didn't offer empty praise or vague compliments. He studied Daniel's work carefully, then extended an invitation for a small exhibition. Daniel almost didn't believe it. Now, standing inside that gallery months later, he looked around at the walls filled with his paintings. People moved through the space quietly, some pausing, some smiling, some simply feeling something they couldn't put into words. He remembered the rejection letter. The months of silence. The nights when he believed his dream had ended. But now, it all felt different. He realized the truth he once couldn't see: the closed door hadn't been punishment, it had been direction. If he had been accepted into that art school, he might have followed a path that looked right on paper but never felt like his own voice. Instead, he had been guided here, through doubt, through loss, through patience he didn't know he had. As he stood in the quiet hum of the gallery, Daniel finally understood. Sometimes, life doesn't delay us. It redirects us. And everything that once felt like an ending, was actually the beginning. The paintings no longer felt like just colors on canvas, they felt like fragments of a journey he had survived. He thought back to the boy who once believed rejection meant the end of everything. The young artist who sat in a dark room, convinced that one closed door had erased his entire future. And then he thought of the man he had become. Not because everything went right, but because everything first went wrong. A quiet gratitude settled in his chest. Not for the success itself, but for the path that made it possible. Daniel finally understood that nothing in his story had been random. Every delay, every disappointment, every moment of doubt had been shaping him in ways he could not see at the time. As he turned off the gallery lights, he carried with him not just achievement, but lessons. 1. Rejection is not the end of your story. Sometimes, it is the beginning of a better direction you cannot yet see. 2. silence does not mean failure. Even when nothing seems to be happening, growth is often taking place beneath the surface. 3. Inspiration can come from unexpected places. A simple moment at a street fair was enough to reignite everything he thought he had lost. 4. Consistency matters more than early success. Daniel's breakthrough did not come from talent alone, but from showing up even when no one was watching. 5. Life often redirects, not rejects. What feels like a closed door may actually be protection from a path not meant for you. Outside, the Seattle night was calm, the rain now gentle instead of heavy. Daniel looked up at the sky and smiled slightly. For the first time, he wasn't asking why things had happened. He already knew. Everything had happened for a reason. Sometimes the hardest part of the journey is not the failure itself, but the silence that follows it, the moments when nothing seems to change, and you start questioning your worth, your timing, and even your dreams. But Daniel's story is a reminder that life rarely closes a door without opening a better direction in disguise. What feels like rejection may actually be redirection. What feels like delay may be development. And what feels like an ending may just be the quiet start of something greater. So if you're standing in your own season of waiting, don't give up too early. Don't bury your dreams because of one no or one closed door. Sometimes, the universe is simply guiding you away from what was never meant for you, and toward what will finally make sense. Because in the end, the story is never just about what you lost. It's about what you were being prepared for all along. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful motivational stories that inspire hope, patience, and perspective. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. See you next time. Stay patient, trust the journey, and remember, everything happens for a reason.